All right, what follows is a series of pieces of advice regarding each part of your pilot studies. So research question advice, again, based on the variety of research questions. For some of you, the research questions I saw on your pilot study, and this is by no means everyone, but for some of you, you wander away from being specific. And I really, again, recommend you use that scaffolding tool that we talked about in class, where it had the who, the what, what you're interested in and so forth, where, all of that, because those really seem to generate some very specific research questions. So I want to give you a couple of examples. A specific example: in what ways do intensive outreach programs, including X and Y, so name the programs, increase a sense of belonging among Latino students at a Hispanic serving institution? So for a pilot study, keep in mind that you're not going to be solving all the problems of the world, although I know we all want to, and I know you are, in fact, doing that. We want to try to be very specific in our pilot study. So an example of the same question, but too broad, is how can higher education increase a sense of belonging and community connection among underserved students? Okay, so a couple of issues here. Or a couple of, not even necessarily issues, but just in terms of making more specific, saying something like, how can higher education, when you actually know what institution you're talking about, just state the institution you're talking about for this pilot study. Potential problem number 2 for a pilot study is that it states sense of belonging and community connection. You could maybe get at both of these constructs in a pilot study, but you may want to think about narrowing to only one of them. And finally, among underserved students is just a huge group, right? We've got, are you talking about first year college students? Are you talking about, a variety of different ethnic minority groups? Are you talking about women in the science disciplines, right? There's a lot of different ways to go about this. So maybe being a little more explicit. So I'm going to repeat the advice about the literature review again, and maybe add a little bit more. Your literature review should not just be a collection of 3 contributing factors, especially if your research is only about one of them. All right. So, but the stuff from your qualifying exam that was about the overview of the nature of the problem might be useful in your literature review. Okay, number 1. Number 2, you need to be sure to cover the prior research on this exact topic. So if it's about one contributing factor, for example, then you would really highlight that contributing factor. You might even have to do a little more reading. Number 2, you need to identify and define the main constructs, so be sure to do that. And number 3, and this is something that I think is a little bit hit and miss in your conclusion paragraph, but for sure, go back and look at your conclusion paragraph and make sure you identify a need for additional study or analysis. And this is, sort of the research gap. But it could just be that you need to study it in your context. So what that means is you may have to take out some contributing factors that have very little to do with your study, and you might have to do a little bit more reading. But I will have you know that ultimately your dissertation, which would hopefully be a continuation of an expansion of what you're studying in your pilot study, will benefit from fleshing out more about this particular contributing factor or whatever it is you're doing. And I also want you to know that if whether or not I've gone in and given comments yet on your lit review and intro, you can make these changes, right? Because it's a Google Doc, it's a living document, so feel free to go in there this week if you want and make some of these changes. And if I haven't given comments, I would love it if you would go in and make these changes. The other thing to check about your lit review, and again, this is a repetition, but now that you've been trying to hone it, this will help you. So go back in and look at your lit review and make sure that the lit review and the introduction and the research question all focus on the same key constructs so that you're not throwing a random one in just because it was one of your contributing factors. Also, that you have brought in the context, so the place, the who, like what kinds of students, and the what, right? That you've defined those and you've brought those up. Thank you, Allison, for your question. Let me offer up a little bit of clarification. The literature review of a pilot study should be aimed at the research question. That's why I put the research question here. So not, and I can definitely see the confusion when I say to talk about your context. I don't mean your context, like you wouldn't talk about your school where you're doing your research, but general research on the context. So you would need general research on what is an alternative, or at least define what an alternative education setting is, define what marginalized students are considered, define what project-based learning is. So it's what's in the literature about these things that you're researching. So if you're researching higher education or Hispanic serving institutions, you're going to define it using the literature. Later in the methods is when you talk about your specific context and the specific who that you're talking about. So thank you for that question. That was a very good question. Hopefully this will clarify. Okay, some reminders about methods as you go in to write them. Really important bullet points here. Number one, be specific about how, where, and when you will collect data. You were perhaps rightfully critical of the example we read in terms of this. Also, be very specific about your sample, and it's okay to be really clear. You don't have to cloud this in academic language. I will interview 4 people. I will attempt to survey 20 freshman students, blah, blah. One of the things that can help is to include a chart or a table or even a figure. Particularly, I encourage you to do that for district demographics. So if you're going to be in 2 districts or even 1 district, go to eddata.k12.org or something like that, ed-data, if you search for it. And you can just download an Excel table of your district demographics, free and reduced lunch, English language learners, and so forth, and then just place it in here and make it look, good, like a word table. You may want to have a table of interview collection. You're going to interview, 2 people at this school and 2 people at that school. So, but they're going to be 2, 5th grade, or 1 5th grade and 1 4th, or whatever. I also recommend that you read the methods again of an author that you admire that's doing a similar method. So, or read the samples that we've provided. So reading those methods really helps. All right, so I don't know how this slide was missed in the first lecture, but let me talk briefly about it. The data collection protocol. I just want to talk about how this part goes into your methods. So in your methods, the paragraph that's about your data collection is going to specify how you created your protocol, including where you got it or where you got the idea of it. So like your interview protocol might be adapted from somewhere, or maybe just from reading the book, that kind of thing. You're going to cite the books that talk about that type of protocol, that talk about like a semi-structured interview protocol, for example. And then you're going to refer to the appendix wherein you will have your protocol so that I can give you feedback on it. That protocol, so you'll need to revise it based on your peers' feedback before you put it in your Google Doc. And then I will give you additional feedback, and then at that point, once you revise it based on my feedback, you can use it to start collecting data. So it's a work in progress until that point.